I want to think about the relationship between knowledge and definitions, specifically the growth of knowledge in definitions, what role definitions have in the growth of knowledge. And I'm sure I'm going to get this a little bit wrong because I'm just thinking about it. This is how I think about it today. And I think the easiest way to start thinking about this is to think about the logical strength of definitions. Strength might not be the right word, I'm not sure, but what are the logical implications of a definition? And I think that there are none. And that's an important starting point to know about. And really, to flesh this out, I'm just going to give a broad view of different types of statements and what their logical implications would be, and how that's useful in the growth of knowledge. What I really want to focus on is knowledge, and theories are a form of knowledge, and theories have lots of implications. They can, at least some theories have lots of implications and create lots of statements. So instead of saying theories, I'm going to say universal statements. It's a type of statement, and they can be theories. Universal statements are very broad statements, and they usually imply singular statements. Those singular statements also imply existential statements, and all of that implies a definition. So this is kind of the tiers of implication. Universal implies singular, which implies existential, which implies definition. And then zooming into that, if we see a singular statement, it does not imply a universal statement, but it does imply a existential statement and definition, of course. And then the same with the existential statement. It doesn't imply a universal, it doesn't imply a singular, but it does imply a definition. And then a definition, it doesn't imply anything. So that's all rather abstract. I'll just give a pretty simple example. My universal statement is going to be that all ravens are black. Simple universal statement. It just means, well, you know what it means. You can understand basic English. All ravens are black. So if we take a universe that consists of ravens, any particular raven would be black. That is the implied singular statement. Another way of saying it is, this raven is black. You take a raven, this one is black. You take any particular raven, it's going to be black. That's a singular statement. And the existential statement would be, there exists a black raven. And then the definition would be, of course, whatever a raven is, and then whatever the color black is, and so on. So the good thing about a universal statement is that it implies those singular statements. And the special thing about that is that you can observe the world, and in that observation, what you get is another statement, which I'll call a basic statement. And that basic statement could contradict with the singular statement. There's something that could contradict, and if you contradict that, that means that your universal statement is wrong, in which case it is a prompt to update your universal statement. You see what I mean here? If I say all ravens are black, that implies that any raven I see would be black. I grab a raven, the singular statement is, this raven is black, and then I can observe the raven that I've grabbed, and if it is black, then it verifies that singular statement. And if it is not black, then it contradicts that singular statement. And if that singular statement is contradicted, then the universal statement needs to be updated. So the universal statement is telling me a lot about the world, because it's telling me that every raven should be black. And there are a lot of different things that could contradict it. Now, if I just had a singular statement, this raven is black, there's not that much that can contradict it. I mean, you can just observe that one raven being a different color, and there you go, you've contradicted it. But it doesn't tell you anything else about the world, because if you only pay attention to the singular statement, it doesn't really express much. It doesn't restrict much about the world, and who cares? So it could be verified or falsified, but it's just not helpful for anything, unless there is a universal statement from which it was derived. The final thing is the existential statement, which will be something like, there is a black raven, and there's really no data. There's nothing that could contradict this statement, because it doesn't imply any singular statements. Since there is a black raven doesn't imply that any particular raven would be black, then there's nothing really that you could do to counter that. I might say something like Bigfoot exists. There is an interdimensional Yeti monster in the forest. I can just say that, and there will be nothing that could contradict that. Or I could say there are aliens that are gray, and again, nothing can contradict it. It could be verified. You could just find a black raven, or you could find Bigfoot, and you could find gray aliens, but it doesn't really help you with. It doesn't tell you anything. Again, like the existential statement doesn't imply any singular statements, which means that it doesn't really tell you much about the world. Okay, and as you can see here, the universal statement, it can be falsified. The singular statement can be falsified or verified. And then the existential statement can only be verified. It cannot be falsified. Right? Those are our 3 different types of statements. But they all imply a definition. And a definition is even worse than all of these, because a definition it can't be falsified, it can't be verified, it can't do anything logically, and it doesn't necessarily prompt you to change your theories or update your universal theories, or even tell you that you should update your universal theories. So whatever I consider to be a raven doesn't matter. It doesn't change what my statements are. Whatever I consider to be an alien or whatever, it doesn't change what my statements are. So I could just define these things in any way that I want, and it has no bearing on any of the statements, nor on the growth of knowledge. And so this is one of the reasons why it really doesn't matter. Definitions are really just not that important. You don't need to define things. Of course, you do want to have a general idea of what somebody's talking about, whenever they're talking about something. But if you have a universal theory, and even better, if you're solving a particular problem with that universal theory, then all of the definitions will be implied in the solution, in the theory. Okay, well, anyway, this is my swing at understanding why definitions are not so super important in the growth of knowledge, and why universal theories are way more important, and in fact, integral, and probably the most important and only thing that's relevant in the growth of knowledge. Singular statements are derived from universal statements so that they can be contradicted by basic statements, which are observations in reality. But that's just so that the universal statement can be updated. And existential statements are so logically weak that they're not very helpful. And definitions are even worse. All right. Thanks for listening.